And this is the continuation of our kind of commemoration of the Alma Ata Declaration. This is our third week, and this week we're looking at building partnerships. So I'll just hand over to the two speakers, and they can continue from there. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to say we are absolutely delighted to be here and to contribute to this conversation, and we hope that the information and the work we've done so far on sharing the Patient Partner Project will be interesting, and that it will actually attract people to come and work with us on various spin-offs from this project. I just want to say that apart from Natasha, we also have two of our patient partners here, as well as our patient partner coordinator, so Nasipo, Shalmaine and Sadiq, and they will also have a chance to speak. And then we also have the rest of our team here, and they might at some stage feel to contribute something, so that will be very nice. Right, so in starting with the patient partners, everything always comes down to a question. Right? So what was the thing that really bothered us? And so this project was born actually quite a long time ago, realizing that the end product of what we do, that is the training of the medical students to be able to communicate with patients, may not be doing what we wanted to do. And so how did we get to that point? So if you look at the literature, there certainly are much greater roles for patients, for active involvement of patients in the training of healthcare professionals than what we are currently doing it, and the examples that we see around us. And there's plenty of academic support for that. The issue that I started grappling with was this intersection, if I could call it a triangle, that is formed between the patient, the student, and the doctor. Right? In that triangle, who is the primary person that the student is learning from? If you look at a seminal text for us, which is the Nuclear Dye text, 2008, they call they refer to the patient as being the primary text, and that a student should actually read off the patient instead of reading or trying to communicate with the patient as something they have to practice on, or someone they have to practice on, and practicing their skills. Remember, we're talking about a student, not necessarily a doctor at this stage, or a qualified healthcare professional. And so this question of the patient as text was something that was really vexing to me, because I could see that we are not reading off that. We're reading off our template on how to take a history from a patient, and then we're practicing on the patient. So that was a big thing. And then, of course, it refers us back to the question about our type of pedagogy. We all know about patient-centered. In terms of education, we learn about doctor-centered and student-centered. And these tend to be very definite categories. And once we go out into the wards, we leave them behind as being in the classroom. And surely that is where the learning really takes place. So a lot of my background and orientation has been working with medical students, and that's where this question originally came from. But you can see that the issues that it addresses actually has to do with all healthcare providers, because it has to do with patients, whether we call them patients, whether we call them clients, right? It's the same issues that manifest. So in 2012, a paper was published by the staff in the Clinical Skills Center, Draper et al. And that paper was a neat analysis for simulated patients. So our goal was at that stage to say, well, can we teach our students better habits, better practices, if they practice first on some actors, right? And so we did a study which had some really interesting conclusions, which confirmed the issues that we have about the patient as primary text. And those conclusions basically was that students thought that patients were very useful to practice on, but they had huge issues with the artificiality, the artificial nature of simulated patients, and that they wouldn't see them as being legitimate, first of all. And secondly, they valued the time spent with the clinicians more than the time spent with the patients. They didn't want to learn with patients, they wanted to learn with doctors, right? Which again takes us back to this point, is, who is the best person to learn from when you have to learn to take a history? Is it from the doctor or is it from the patient? And if you go beyond who's the best, you have to ask yourself, what has different communities and people have to offer, you know, in terms of contributing to the learning that happens with the students. And certainly from my experience with medical students, that the value that is given to the contribution of patients and doctors is skewed in a hegemonic way towards the doctors, right? Where the power is sitting, that power is being reinforced through the way in which we're teaching. So this is where the Patient Partner Project was born from. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in how it came to pass. I want to zoom in particularly on this idea of partnership. So partnership, as we know, is a key aspect, a key component of primary healthcare, and this is the reason why we're presenting it in this particular forum. And it implies an active relationship, right, rather than passive, based on recognition of a common interest, and then going into that third point there, recognizing that when people's voices are heard, they're contributing something, they're making a meaningful contribution. And if we were to draw on these principles and do something with it, it could lead us into a new direction rather than just trying to plug holes with the old, you know, finding a new way of telling the students that they must be patient-centered, right? Whereas our practices are showing that. And so the concept of a patient partner draws on many different conceptual terms and definitions, but I want to emphasize that the way that we conceptualize the patient partner is more than those terms individually. So the terms that we particularly draw on is that of the service user. So service user is a term very often used in European literature to refer to people, clients from the health and rehab perspectives, or when we talk about the social workers, they talk about service users. So these are people that use healthcare services that are brought into either education or research to provide input and to help the students to understand local context. So it might not necessarily be someone with a disease, but it could be someone who's living on the street or who has recovered from substance abuse, etc. Service users are huge in Europe. It's definitely a trend, to the extent that the EU is actually currently funding a mapping exercise across Europe of who is actually bringing service users into their into their teaching and into their research. Then, of course, we get the very well-known concept, that of standardized simulated patients. Maybe just for me to explain the difference between the two. So standardized refers to the fact that someone has a certain history, a certain story, which we standardize from one, let me put it this way, that is in some way repeatable, right? So the response of the patient to a certain thing will be remaining the same. And if we've got more than one person doing a similar case, there should be standardization across those people based on the specifics of that case and the learning objectives of that case. Simulated refers to the fact that we are doing role play, and people often see these two as being the same thing because role play is often considered to be standardized. So the way in which we see patient partners as being this but more is that our emphasis is not on simulation, it is not on standardization, it is on the authenticity of this person. But in that, we think that they can play a valuable role in terms of role playing, and that standardization is less about standardization and more about consistency. So we reject the term standardized. We don't think that what we do is standardized at all, or what our patient partners do with our students can be standardized. We don't want it to be standardized, but there is a level of consistency that we look at. And so the seminal paper, the important paper, if you want to know more about service users, is the Dressen's paper, Dressen's et al. 2010. And I would really recommend anyone who's interested in finding out what's happening elsewhere around this to go read that paper. So that's more on the background of it. So I'm going to hand over to Natasha to tell you a little bit about the project, very briefly, and then we're going to get more into the aspect of the partnership with patients.
Okay, so Rachel's given a sense of the background that led to this project, but just to sort of position the project for you itself. So it's one of 3 projects that's part of a consortium called the Caring Society Consortium, which consists of 3 European universities. So we've got Karel de Groote in Belgium, we've got Avans in the Netherlands, and Lahti University in Finland. And then in South Africa, we've got the CPUT, UWC, and UCT. And so each of the South African institutions is responsible for one of the 3 projects within the consortium. So there's the Health and Lifestyle Program, there's Care for the Caregiver, and then UCT, which is running the Patient Partner Project. And all of this has been funded for a 3-year period by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. So just to give you a sense of the Patient Partner Project then as a whole, it's important to just recognize that it's not a research project, but a capacity development project. And what it's looking to do is bring together these 3 key groups of stakeholders, so namely staff, students, and patients, into this multidisciplinary, multicultural team that can collaborate on developing a communications curriculum specifically for students within health and social care contexts. And within this partnership, what's important is that we recognize each of these 3 key stakeholders as experts by experience. So our staff are experts at educating students, at being healthcare providers themselves. Our patients are experts at being on the receiving end of these communicative practices of engaging with the healthcare system. And our students are experts at learning from educators and at learning from patients. And so what we want to do is bring these 3 groups together to collaborate. So the overarching framework for our project is one of community of practice. And so what we recognize is that if we use the community of practice as a framework, we can develop shared histories, beliefs, and values around a common goal, so the development of a communications curriculum, that will allow us to collaborate together on developing this. So it's important to note that we don't say that we are a community of practice, and this has been a very important learning curve for us in this project. We are becoming a community of practice. And this is particularly relevant in this context where you have 3 groupings that are coming together, but there are power differentials between those 3 groupings. So that's what Rachel was talking about in terms of whose knowledge do we prioritize? Is it the doctor? Is it the patient? Is it the student? Whose needs are we prioritizing? And those power differentials really need to be taken into account. So traditionally, what we see in the literature is that patients can often be seen as a threat to educators and a threat to educator identity because we want to hold on to the authority and expertise that we have. And that students tend to be seen and tend to see themselves as something of a middleman in a hierarchy between educators, patients, and students. And that while sometimes educators and medical professionals are willing to sort of lend power to other groupings, there's definitely a resistance to genuinely relinquishing power to allow a shared power system, to allow shared decision making. And so the theory that we've been engaging with there is Einstein's ladder of participation. So this was developed in the late 60s. It's been around for a long time, and it's remained a really important framework, especially within social care research. And what was significant about it was that it showed that whenever you have 2 or more groups of unequal power coming together, trying to collaborate on something, you can very quickly end up in a situation where the collaboration is not collaborative. It's actually manipulative or tokenistic. So we might ask someone's opinion, but are we actually willing to share decision-making power with them? And so really, a lot of the work in this project has been about how do we develop a partnership amongst these 3 groupings? How does everything that we do try to facilitate a genuine partnership where there is shared decision-making, shared input, where all of the voices are being valued equally? And that has been challenging. So just to describe our partnership in a little bit more detail, as I said, we have staff partners, we have undergraduate student partners, and we have our patient partners. So our staff partners represent a very multidisciplinary team of healthcare and educational professionals. So we've got representatives from our 3 European institutions, and then a complement of staff here from UCT. And the disciplines that are represented are really diverse, so medicine, physiotherapy, communication, science disorders, nursing, psychology, social work. So we've got a really diverse grouping of staff that are trying to lend their expertise to this project. And as Rachel mentioned, the service user approach has really exploded across Europe. It's become really significant in terms of educating healthcare students there. And so our European staff members all have experience of using service users in the context of the classroom. And that is different than what we're doing with the Patient Partner Project, but it's certainly an expertise that's been really valuable to us in terms of thinking through our own issues and our own processes around using patient partners. We have two groups of student partners that we've engaged with. So we had undergraduate partners from UCT, and these were MBCHB students that we recruited through the second year special study module. And then we recruited a group of undergraduate European students, and these students were recruited via the internationalization semester abroad type programs that run from their home institutions. And then we've got our group of patient partners, which we're obviously very excited about and very excited to showcase. And when we constituted this group, we were really looking for individuals that had had meaningful engagement with the healthcare system. So this was either as being a patient themselves or having been in the position of being the long-term carer for a family member or something like that, where that person often is then in the position of having to advocate with the healthcare system, with the doctor, on behalf of the patient. Because we were looking for authentic engagement with students in role-play type scenarios, we were also looking for people that had an interest in teaching and learning, that had good listening skills, that could think and act creatively, that had a level of emotional intelligence, that they were able to see what was going on around them, to reflect on their own feelings, their own reactions to that, and then be able to offer feedback to the student. So we were looking for quite a diverse and complex skill set when we started to recruit our patient partners. And we used applied improvisation as a recruitment strategy, which we will talk about in more detail shortly. So what I've just given you now is a sense of how our partnership is constituted within this project. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit more about a couple of the project outcomes. So one of them is the development of a communications curriculum, which we've conceptualized as having three key parts. So there's the interpersonal part, that one-on-one communication that happens between any two individuals. Then we've got the kind of interprofessional part of the communication. So the multi-disciplinary communication that needs to happen between professional teams of healthcare providers. And then we have the intercultural communication that happens between any two people that come from different cultural backgrounds. And so we don't see these things as being separate. There's obviously intersection between all of them and their layer, but we recognize them as three key aspects of communication that we want to engage with. And in terms of the intercultural communication, we've already, one of our colleagues has already developed an intercultural communication workshop, which has actually been presented a number of times already and been through an iterative development process. But I won't go into too much detail about that. What I wanted to come back to and what we really wanted to focus on predominantly today was the partnership, and in particular our patient partners and how we've engaged with them. So in terms of I'll talk a little bit through the recruitment, and then Rachel and Naima are going to give you a sense of the training, the avatar development, and a little bit more about the opportunities and challenges that we've experienced in the program. So as I said, in terms of the recruitment, we followed an applied improvisation approach. So for those of you that are maybe not familiar with applied improv, maybe you've heard of improv in general, so theatre games, whose line is it anyway, right? So that's kind of where improv started, in a very sort of light engagement. And it was in the 60s that Viola Spolin is sort of largely credited with taking improv as a theatre game and actually applying it as an educational tool to enable listening, to enable engagement, to help people focus, to be in the moment, to find choices in a constructive way. And so, although it's remained predominantly confined to the sort of theatrical and dramatic disciplines, it has of late started to emerge into other contexts. And so it's been used to enhance doctor-patient communication, for teaching in higher ed, for collaboration in research, and in fact there have been a few papers published in Medical Teacher recently about using applied improvisation in educational contexts. So the reason that we were interested in using applied improv was because it provides a level of authenticity. When someone plays a game in improv, they have to draw on whatever their skill set is, their current innate abilities that they have to engage with other people. So it really gives you an authentic sense of how someone is able to react and respond to a variety of different things that might be going on around them. It's also, we were looking for a recruitment process that would be beneficial. We recognize that we are also tapping into a vulnerable population by looking for people who are characterized as patients here. We didn't want to put people through a stressful recruitment process. And we also recognized that we would have more applicants than we could take on board. And for those people that weren't successful, we also didn't want that to be a negative experience for them. So we were looking for something beneficial, and improv really is. It's a fun experience. You play for fun. If you don't want to participate, you don't participate. There's no stress, there's no pressure. You jump into a game when you feel ready to do that. You step out when you feel ready. And so it's a low kind of stakes experience. We were looking for something that would be efficient because obviously we have time and resource constraints. And the great thing about improv is that it's a group activity, so we could play it with a large number of people at one time. And there are many, many games to choose from, which really allows you to pick and choose the games that will bring out the things that you're most interested in seeing in the people that are playing. And finally, and I think probably most importantly for us, applied improv is flat. There's no hierarchy. There are no winners. There are no losers. No one knew any differently or any better than anyone else when we were playing it. And so it really did go a long way to flattening the power structures that would naturally already be present amongst our groupings. And so our approach was to work with an applied improv facilitator, and we had 2 workshops. The first workshop was for the staff and the student partners that we'd already recruited. And this workshop just gave us a sense of what the process of improv is like, how the games run, the kinds of games that we could play, and the kinds of observations that we would make about one another playing those games. And then after that workshop, we sat together and we made a selection of games that we felt would be most useful and appropriate to play. And then we held our second workshop, which was the recruitment workshop. We had about 30 applicants turn up that day. And what was nice is that we all played together. We didn't, I facilitated one of the groups. The applied improv facilitator facilitated the second group because we were so many we had to break into 2 groups. But other than that, the staff played, the students played, the patient partners played, and we all played together, and that really did a lot to kind of flatten the power structures that are normally present in an interview or recruitment process. And after the second workshop, the staff and student partners met again to discuss our observations around the applicants that we'd had, and that enabled us to make a really collaborative selection of people that we felt like we could work with. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Rachel and Naima now to talk a little bit about how we've extended these principles into the training.
Thank you very much, Natasha. I think the important thing for us in terms of training was that we wanted to draw very much on trying to understand what people see as the value that they can bring to this kind of project, and keeping in mind that we're trying to do something new. Many times we use the term to say, we have an organic development, which basically means we're trying to see if what we're learning can inform the next action, the next part of what we're doing. And so in the training, there was no curriculum to say, right, this is what you have to do in order to train patients to become partners in a curriculum process, right? I'll get more about the, to speak to a little bit more around their roles and expectations, etc. later. But so we wanted to have some form of training process that looked, that was organic and that reacted on what the patient partners could do. So we had our first workshop soon after the recruitment. This was a workshop led by Busayo, and it wasn't the question of what is culture. It was the SSM students and the patient partners together, and it was by all intents and purposes a really, really useful way to start thinking in practical examples of things that we often put out theoretically, right, as educators. So it was really a great workshop. After that, we had a workshop that Ima and I facilitated to delve a little bit more into the patient partner's understanding of what the roles and responsibilities and jobs were that various health professionals would do. In particular, we looked at their relationship with a doctor, for example, what the expectations were in their prior experiences, as Natasha said, the experiences with the healthcare system. So what does it mean to be a patient if they had relationships with physios, etc.? And then from there on, we tried to map out where the gaps were and where the problems lay. And I'm sorry that you can't really see the posters that were doing here. We started off with more paper in terms of what is relationship-centered care. And then the patient partners went through several facilitated discussions to map out some of their expectations of healthcare professionals in that kind of situation. And they themselves in that discussion, and I'm really hoping that they'll give some feedback later on, acknowledged that there were some things that they thought should happen that way, but when exposed to the other side could see, well, maybe that expectation was unreasonable. And conversely also seeing that some of the expectations that they had were not unreasonable at all, and is a huge failing of the healthcare system. We also went through issues of what kind of support, what kind of things are important to them as patients, and then how they would see their role as now stepping into the gap. If we can acknowledge that there are gaps in the way that our healthcare professionals are treating patients in that communicative event, how do they see themselves contributing to that? What are the opportunities there? What support would they need? And of course, in terms of support, what kind of training would they need in order to develop this kind of partnership? And I have to stress here that this is not your typical develop a curriculum where we sit down with our learning objectives, we jot them, we align them constructively with activities and assessments at the end. And so for us as educators, this was actually a position of great insecurity, right? And a point of really having to examine ourselves and say, am I not in this position now, again holding on to power? How do I constantly remind myself to let go and to let come out of this situation what potentially could come out of here? And so even in this presentation, we don't want to share with you just the things that went well. We want to bring some of the challenges we had in this, and some of the challenges we still have, around negotiating around these things. So our workshops that happened after that was with our partners at Kenny. So we were very, very fortunate to secure, as an associate partner at Kenny, who's an arts foundation, arts therapy foundation, very active in the communities around various projects to do with using art in healing. So art meaning performing arts, visual arts. And they ran several projects, and they adopted this project as one of the projects that they would support, which means that they provided a facilitator to us, Alison Lazarus, who is the most amazing woman, and all of that free of charge. So it was really, really amazing. So the workshops that followed after that was completely designed by Alison. She tried to understand what it is that we're doing, and she came every day to the workshop bringing a set of exercises that, for me, going through those exercises sometimes seemed, why are we doing this? But then, true to my promise that I made to myself to let go and just immerse, was really, really amazing. So these exercises, again, had very much to do with learning to listen to each other. first doing something and then finding the words to describe that action. And it's surprising to see how we start to think in a different way when we put those kind of limitations on ourselves, right? Because we often feel very comfortable to speak up. So you can see the patient partners here are sitting with their backs to each other during that training workshop. One is describing something, the other one is drawing it, right? So how do we listen, how do we speak, what assumptions do we have about what the other person is hearing? In the following workshop, that's a clapping exercise, so really using all the different modalities, clapping, body movement. I certainly found myself running around the room. This is in Groote Schuur Hospital, reaching for that corner and connecting myself to that corner, because often we lose that connectedness with our environment. And when we lose that, we also pay penalties in terms of our connectedness with each other. So it was really amazing, and it really was about connecting to ourselves and becoming more aware of ourselves in our own bodies, aware of ourselves in a physical and spatial environment, and aware of ourselves in conversation and in communication with the other and with each other. And so after our 3 workshops, we then had subsequent sessions with the patient partners and students, which were more kind of getting down to the business of, of work in the traditional sense, where the patient partners had interviews with students. The students in some cases had prompts, in other cases not. And it was, and all of those sessions were then, most of those sessions were recorded so that the patient partners could review them afterwards. Some of the sessions were led by one of the patient partners himself, Simpiwe, who has got a background in theatre, and he then was also very useful in going over those videos with the patient partners and helping them to understand, certain issues. So I think the important thing here is to just understand what we mean here with working with students. So in this particular role, we wanted the patient partners to work with students to give them, for the patient partners to learn how to be in a certain role. So in other words, I'm coming with a certain cough or whatever, and the cases that we do are, not outlandish things. It's the kind of things we all suffer from. And then for them to be able to get feedback. So a huge part of what Alison did was about learning to do feedback, and I'm hoping our patient partners will be able to tell you a little bit about what they learned on feedback. And so it was more about getting that consistency in the feedback, acknowledging that in this particular exercise we're working with second-year students and do not have interaction with patients, and so might be very clumsy, but also need their confidence to be built in terms of the interpersonal interpersonal moment. And so it was really a very collaborative space, and we do believe that the patient partners had a lot of fun, but they also learned a lot, that it was very useful to them. So I'm going to ask Naima to speak briefly about the avatars. You wanted to introduce the idea of the avatar? Okay, so because of the fact that we saw one of the roles of the patient partners as doing a limited amount of role play, we were very much struck with how do we deal with this authenticity of a real person who's not an actor, right? And who then has to work with students and do histories, remain a certain logic or consistency, but yet deal with the vulnerabilities around their own lives and their own authenticity. And so we came up with this idea of an avatar. So just to define the avatar, we see as a personality which is based on the patient's own life and own circumstances, but is not the patient themselves. Right, so it is a version of themselves that they choose to project. I'm going to ask Naima just to speak a little bit about, and Naima is a psychologist, and just to speak a little bit around the vulnerabilities and how we develop the avatars and why it is really important for us to have avatars.
All right, so with regards to the need to introduce avatars into the program, from a psychological perspective, there was the thinking that in as much as what we want to encourage patients, the patient partners to share their lived experience, both personally and also as patients in their interaction with the healthcare professionals, We also need to be mindful of the fact that there may be traumatic experiences, that there may be experiences which the patient partners do not feel willing to share with the entire student body. So maybe there might even be experiences that they would be willing to share with us in a smaller team, but not necessarily for learning purposes per se. And so to protect those vulnerabilities and defenses as such, avatars can be very useful in that regard. So the patient's partners really have agency in terms of what they feel comfortable sharing. And the reason for this also is to protect the defense mechanisms that have very often been put in place, which we all put in place to deal with adverse experiences, difficult experiences. So the patient partners can then choose to, even at a later stage, include information that they initially chose to exclude. So literally they've been given control and power over their own experiences and how much of that they are willing and able to bring to this learning experience as well. Okay, yeah.
Thank you. I want to emphasize the fact that this is has been an iterative process. So our students who started off, our SSM students did interviews with the patient partners in their home environment. So they spent some time there to try and really get a feel for them and for each other, building those trust relationships. And those presentations of the students then was presented to us as staff, but also went out to the various partners even in Europe, and people were encouraged to listen to it, to draw on themes. We all see different things based on our own backgrounds. And so as that information came in, we tried to find a framework on which we could hang the patient partner's story, which I'll come to into the next slide. But the important part was that this story went back to the patient partners. And so we would not say, well, this is right or wrong, but, when I read this, there's clearly a gap here. What happened here? And then the patient partner would say, well, I had some, just for example, some traumatic experiences in my childhood or in my marriage or whatever, and I don't feel comfortable about sharing that. And then we would develop a story that makes their stories authentic and legitimate without sharing those things. And it was iterative in the sense that sometimes the patient partner shared something originally, but then came back afterwards and said, I've actually thought about this and this will make my family look bad, so I don't want that in there anymore. And so what we ended up with is a story for each patient partner that is their story, but it's the story that they feel comfortable talking about, which has internal consistency and an internal logic, and yet is incredibly rich. And I have to say here that it was very interesting for me to see how the patient partners had to be coaxed out of believing that their story is not really important. I remember one of our patient partners has quite a significant birthmark on her forehead, and it was just glossed over. And when we had these iterative processes where we interviewed them, so I interviewed them, other of our staff interviewed them, our social worker students interviewed them, to try and build that story. What she told me about what that birthmark meant to her was so beautiful. And when I asked her, is this something you would like to share? She now sees that which she can contribute to this conversation as something really valuable. And I think we often forget that, that we can go there in those sensitive places. It's how we go there and how much agency we actually allow the patient partners to have about, whether it gets included or not at the end. So all the cases are simply that. I have a case, I'm coming to the doctor with a cough, I have, I need a sick letter. So all the rest of it is the patient's own story, or that which they choose to share. And so that's how we deal with remaining in that authenticity, but having some form of consistency. So obviously we had high ideals. We wanted to have this framework, right? And then we wanted to fit all the patient partners over that and have nice categories. Of course, it didn't work like that because this is real life. And so I just want to share a little bit, or not share, really just mention these different things that we considered in how do we think about the avatars. So we had sorry, my mouth's a little dry. So we had the international framework around disability. I forgot, this is called the intersectional framework, I think. Over there, we've got a framework that comes from our European partners, where they look at every event in terms of several points, how the patient is feeling at that day, and they almost connect like a little spider framework. Of course, in South Africa, we know the biopsychosocial framework. And so it was very difficult for us to kind of, in a sense, please so many different partners and come up with a framework. And then at the end, we just made sure that when we construct the avatar with our patient, that we actually address issues around intersectionality, vulnerability, disability, functionality, etc. So that we import all of those things and not just that kind of traditional medical history. So I did promise you that I wasn't going to speak only about the great things, and so we've had wonderful things emerge from this process, and we've also had some challenges. And of course, this is not the end of the story, this is just the beginning of the story. And it's really nice for us to have you guys here, because we're hoping that maybe you can become part of the story. So currently, what we're doing with the patients, the patient partners in particular, is focusing very much on the second year curriculum to just help those students get a little bit more in terms of communication skills, so the feedback that they have in terms of the way they speak, the speed at which they speak. And so this was, the order of events here was simply dictated by, we have all these second years and we have to do something with them, right? So it's not necessarily the order in which we would have liked things, but then again, you have to do, you have multiple bosses to satisfy in any process. And so we did very much focus on the interviewing skills, practice and feedback. And we also recorded those and gave those recordings to the students to go and review themselves. We did a pilot in Sem 3. In Sem 4, the students will again have an opportunity with the patient partners, and they will then have to do a homework task on that presentation and present it to the rest of the interprofessional team again to get feedback on that. And it actually counts a mark. It's not a huge mark, 5%. And I have to say thank you very much to our colleagues in DPPHP, because we are drawing very strongly on the work that they've already done in assessing group work and communication. Then we are also starting to draw out the basics of a research project, in which we want our patient partners to be co-researchers and drawing on participatory action research. And if anyone is interested in that kind of research, then please contact us, because we think that this is, as the patient partner project is a capacity building project, we want to make sure that there's a research component to that. So I want to refer you back here, and unfortunately you can't see it very well, so I'm just going to read it. When we did our patient partner workshop number 2, the patient partners and us came up with a framework to say, but where can patients and should patients make an input? And it was, number one, in the design of a curriculum, right? So right at the beginning, what must go into the curriculum and how should it be taught? Number 2, in the implementation, so during the curriculum. And number 3, in the evaluation. And so we have to upfront that really we had to dive straight into implementation, right? And because it was the most obvious thing, early thing to do, it was the logistical thing we had to do, but now how do we flesh that out bigger to also address these other issues? And then referring back to the ladder of participation, that we constantly need to remind ourselves that we should not get stuck at this level, right? That we actually do need to go into citizen control, delegated power, and true partnerships. So these are the values that we want to hold ourselves up to. And so that's all that I'm going to say about the future from now. Then, of course, some of the challenges that we had. For us as an institution and a staff, it's been sometimes hard to manage a project separate from one's work, but also in that to manage that project in a way differently from what we normally do work, where we try to flatten those hierarchies, are a lot more receptive to the unknown, right? None of us like the unknown. We don't like the unexpected. And to actually make peace with that. Of course, some of our expectations weren't met. I specifically, I can only talk about myself, I was hoping that we would get a lot more kind of value in the patient partners providing feedback to the students. And not all the patient partners are able to provide feedback at the same level, right? Some struggle with that. And so we have to reset our expectations to say, have I now focused too much on implementation and what my goals were? And am I not actually recognizing, because it's a constant process of slippage, what can be brought in here? And so I'm very pleased to have Sadiq here, hoping to speak a little bit later. But Sadiq, for example, is an example of someone who brings his own discourse into this space. Sadiq is an activist. He's well, all our patient partners are activists, but Sadiq is quite an outspoken activist, and he knows, I always tease you, he talks a lot, right? And we know that when we are in an encounter with a patient, sometimes we only have 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, right? So how do we actually get through the business of the day in such a short time? So a patient like Sadiq presents us with a huge challenge, right? So rather than trying to force someone like Sadiq, someone like our other patient partners into saying, you have to do it in this time, you have to give that feedback out quickly. How do we draw on their strengths to teach our students how you deal with someone who has a lot to say, legitimately, right? But you're sitting within these constraints of not having a lot of time, right? So how do we do that? And this is obviously a challenge for us, but it's also a strength. So every challenge is also an opportunity. Of course, finances, we have some budget. It is not a massive bad budget, and we have had the benefit of some freebies through Zakeni. However, the problem is that the logistical arrangement that goes around with the financing is huge. It puts an extra administrative burden on us and on our staff, which is quite significant. It doesn't seem like it when one sits and thinks about it, but our institution is not set up for these kinds of things. And so we have to jump through hoops for our patient partners to get paid, and that then becomes one of their issues, because then they don't get paid on time, right? And then another point was the logistics around getting the patient partners and the students in the same room. So we have 265 second-year students, right? And we see them over 4 days. So how do we do something with those patient partners and those students in a way that is meaningful, right? We don't want to just jump in and out. How are we doing it meaningful, consistently, so that one student doesn't say, well, I never had a chance to speak to the patient partner, right? And create those times. So this is challenging for us because our curricula are full. And it comes down to the point to say, what are we actually valuing in terms of our curricula? Where do we put the marks? You know, where do we say, well, that thing, you know, examination of the cardiovascular system should get 90% of our time, and the history should get 10% of our time. So we have to make those decisions, and we have to have those discussions as we go through, as we deal with these challenges around logistics. So then, of course, there were challenges for the patient partners. You know, we've had the discussion around the finances. This was a big thing because the patient partners were recruited from people that didn't have full-time jobs. So their dependence on that stipend coming in on time, you know, may mean that next time they can't come because they don't have taxi money, because they haven't been paid for the last session, right? And so it's very difficult for them to deal with this kind of system because there's always power in it. So the challenge for all of us is to have that conversation so that we don't have misperceptions and misconceptions and blame-laying exercises on how to deal with this. So what I would like for the patient partners, are we staying on time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah, we're in trouble with time. And then we could maybe just skip to the patient partners.
Okay, so I'll only say on this slide that we are doing quality assurance with this project, and we are looking at the social inclusion approach in making giving our feedback to the Europeans. So we're not counting how many publications or how many exercises. We're looking at how people intersected with each other and at what points you know, meaningful things happened. We're also doing an infill study, and maybe at the end of that, Chidinma can talk to us a little bit about it. But Chidinma's study is really about the perceptions of the patient partner in this project. So we're going to, shall we play Wendy's video or just speak?
I think we should let the partners that are here speak.
So the first person I'd like to introduce is Nasipa. Nasi is the patient partner coordinator. Nasipa, please come up here. She is the properties and services staff in our department, and she became involved in the project. and actually based her participation in the higher certificate in adult education around this project. So the project opened an opportunity for her to develop her own learning, and you know, she has done absolutely beautiful, graduating at the end of the year together with our 2 other patient partners that are here, and you know, it would be wonderful to hear from you for a few minutes.
What I learned from patient and partner through last year, through this year, it was the communication between the doctors and the patient, and I even use it for my assignments. And my last assignment that was, I was using patient and partner, I get distinction on it. And it was, I was so happy because Rachel didn't help me that much. I just asked her some questions because I do know there and there. But another thing I learned from patient and partner is it's transparent. Because one of my friends went to the doctor other day and the doctor diagnosed him about high blood pressure, but the doctor was so busy. You've got, my friend, you have a high blood pressure, you need to go to the reception, just take your tablets for 30 days, then it will normalize your high blood pressure. But my friend was, wanted to know how did I get high blood pressure? How can I help it with tablets or with medication? I don't understand. What makes me have that high blood pressure? No, with your age. But the doctor was rushing, and he was not happy to have that information. And then we went to take the medication, but because I learned from patient and partner second opinion, we went to another doctor where we sit down and we want that discussion. Just to withdraw the power, we must be in the same power. So the doctor explained to us that, no, you can do this and that to take your high blood pressure to normal. And we were so happy to have that conversation with that doctor. And we were like, what about that one? And now I saw what his patient and partner teaching, they try to teach the community, but it's not easy. As we patient and partner, it's a bridge to get into our community, to teach some of our community or our society how to grab the power from the doctors and the patient.
Beautiful English. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Charmaine, and I'm so privileged to be able to be part of the patient partner. I was a carer for my husband for about 5 years. It was very challenging, but I think because of caring for him, it had opened the door for me to be able to be part of the patient partner project. I've learned a lot over this couple of months. Whatever I've learned here, I was able to implement in my community where I'm the seniors chairperson for Steer of Civic Association. I've really learned how to communicate. With the I statement, it's really helped me. Instead of blaming you, I can now say I prefer, and I feel, and I think. I've really learned a lot. I've learned also my listening skills has really also improved. I've learned to do deep listening, and I've learned to give to express interest when I'm listening, and not to have unnecessary distractions like playing with my phone or whatever. I've learned to make eye contact so that I can see when the person has a problem, what the unspoken word is, the feelings they are not expressing. So it is so important that we make that eye contact with whoever we are speaking to. I've also learned not to be judgmental, not to focus on the person, not to focus on the person, but on the problem itself. I've also learned to respect and not to judge. So the patient partner program has taught me, as a 63-year-old, it has really taught me so much. You know, the things that I thought I knew, I didn't really know. And I'm so happy and so privileged to be part of this program. And I thank you.
Promise I'll try and keep it short. Okay. With regards to the, what I really like about the patient partner program is, I had an opportunity to observe myself, during the interaction with the students, and being someone who is passionate about learning, and not my own learning so much, but more the learning of others. I really had to reflect on what I'm doing. And what that brought me to at the end of the day was, what I like most is the ability or that we were trained and developed to really give feedback from a non-judgmental and a zero perspective, without assumptions, without expectations. That we just give that honest and sincere feedback at the end of the day, to our students. And that has in fact changed me. I believe and feel, as an individual, and definitely benefited me, in my studies this year as well. The patient partner program, why I chose to become involved in it is, even though it's in its infancy with all its teething problems and all of those things, like any project has, and anything, the impact that we can make to society by improving medical care, by improving the service delivery, because that's the kind of person I am. I'm about service at the end of the day. So my avatar is this avatar that comes in and he wants to be treated immediately, no long and short about it. So, and that is Simon. So, but to me the impact that we are able to make. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad that the whole team came and we heard from the different perspectives. Unfortunately, I was hoping that we would go on and on with different stories like that, but we have to draw to a close. There's another class coming in right now. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to the team for coming and sharing this with us. This is going to go on to Facebook eventually, and we will be sharing the links with you. And hopefully more and more people will have the privilege and opportunity to have a look at this big project that you're busy with. Thank you very much.
And thank you to everyone that's here. And as I said, we glossed over some slides, the Intercultural Workshop, some of the contributions that people have made. So I really want to ask that when the video goes out there, if you see something that you can connect with, please don't hesitate to contact us on the staff slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you.